The night was cold and the city was alive with noise, but in the dark alleys no one cared who lived or died. A human man named Daniel walked home after a long day of work. His boots were heavy with dust and his stomach growled. But when he passed by the alley near the old market, he froze. There, in the shadows, he saw movement. At first he thought it was just stray dogs searching for scraps, but then he heard a small cough, soft and weak. He stepped closer and saw them clearly. An alien mother and her little daughter crouched low, digging through a pile of trash. Their faces were thin, their clothes torn, and their eyes hollow with hunger. The mother's hands shook as she pulled a piece of moldy bread from the heap. She looked at it with sorrow but tried to hide it when her daughter tugged at her arm. The child was small, her ribs visible through her skin. She whispered something in her alien tongue, and her mother broke the bread in half, giving her the larger piece. Daniel's chest tightened. He could not walk away. Most people in the city would have. Aliens were not welcomed here. They were seen as outsiders, as burdens. Some even called them thieves or pests. But what he saw was not an enemy. It was just a mother and child fighting to survive. Without thinking, Daniel reached into his bag. He pulled out a loaf of bread he had bought earlier. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over them. The mother turned quickly, her eyes wide. She pulled her daughter close, ready to protect her. "Wait," Daniel said softly, holding out the bread. His voice carried no threat, only kindness. The little girl's eyes widened, staring at the food. The mother hesitated, her lips trembling. She looked at him with suspicion. Humans rarely showed mercy. But the smell of the bread filled the air, and her daughter's hands reached out before she could stop her. Daniel placed the loaf on the ground and stepped back. He did not want them to think he would harm them. The girl grabbed the bread and held it tightly, tears in her big eyes. The mother whispered something sharp, but then her face broke. She too was hungry, and pride could not silence her stomach. The child took a bite, and Daniel saw joy spread across her face. For the first time, she smiled. A weak but real smile. The mother bowed her head slightly, her alien features tense with gratitude. Daniel stood there for a moment, watching. He felt the eyes of others on him. People passing by the alley stared, whispering. "He's feeding them," someone muttered. Another scoffed. Foolish human, wasting food on them. But Daniel did not care. His heart beat heavy in his chest. He turned and left. But the image stayed with him all night. He could not forget the way the little girl's hand shook as she held the bread, nor the way the mother's eyes looked at him, torn between pride and desperation. The next day, Daniel returned. He told himself he didn't have to, but his feet carried him back to the alley. Again, he found them. The mother sat against the wall, holding her daughter close. Her eyes widened when she saw him, but he only smiled and pulled out some fruit. The child gasped, her mouth opening wide with joy. The mother tried to push the food back, whispering, "No, no," shaking her head. But Daniel gently placed the fruit in her hands and said, "Eat, you both need this." And so it began. Every day Daniel came, sometimes with bread, sometimes with fruit, sometimes with soup in an old container. The little girl began to wait for him. She would peek out of the shadows when she heard his footsteps. Her smile grew brighter with each visit, but the whispers also grew louder. Neighbors saw him, workers at the market saw him. "Why is he feeding them?" they asked. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others muttered about reporting him. Daniel ignored them all. In his eyes it was simple. They were hungry, and he could not let them starve. He remembered his own childhood, when food was scarce, when his mother skipped meals so he could eat. That memory burned in his heart. He would not let this mother and child suffer if he could help it. One night, as he left food and turned to go, the little girl ran forward. She caught his hand in her tiny one. Her alien skin felt warm. Her big eyes looked up at him, and she whispered in broken human words, "Thank you." Daniel froze. His heart ached. He bent down and touched her shoulder gently. "You're welcome," he whispered back. In that moment, he knew something had changed. It was no longer just about giving food. It was about connection, about seeing them not as aliens but as people. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered how long he could keep this up before the city turned its eyes fully on him. The alley was dark, the city cold, but for one mother and daughter, hope had begun to bloom, and it all started with one man who refused to walk away. The sun rose again over the crowded city, but for Daniel, the morning felt different now. His thoughts were no longer about his own hunger or his long shifts at the factory. Instead, he thought about the two shadows waiting in the alley, the alien mother and her daughter. He carried a small bag of food close to his chest as he walked. Every step felt heavier, not from the weight of the bread, but from the weight of watching eyes. People in the street had begun to notice his strange routine. They whispered to each other when he passed. Some shook their heads, some sneered, but Daniel kept walking. When he reached the alley, the little girl was already there, peeking around the corner. Her face lit up when she saw him. She ran to him, her bare feet slapping against the stone ground. She clutched the hem of his coat for a moment before darting back to her mother. Daniel smiled. His chest warmed at her trust. The mother stood tall, though her body was weak. She tried to look strong in front of her child, but her sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes betrayed her. When Daniel held out the bread and fruit, she hesitated again. She always hesitated. Her pride was a shield she wore like armor. But when her daughter's little hands reached for the food, she let the shield fall. They ate slowly, carefully, as if savoring every bite. Daniel leaned against the wall nearby, watching them with quiet satisfaction. He never asked for thanks, never asked for their names. He only gave. Days turned into weeks, and the routine continued. Daniel's steps always led him back to the alley. Sometimes he brought bread, sometimes fruit, sometimes even a warm container of stew if he could spare it. The little girl began to expect him. She would sit by the edge of the alley, her eyes searching the crowd, and when she spotted him, she would run forward. Her smile became brighter each day. The mother's eyes, however, were different. She still looked at him with suspicion. Sometimes when she took the food, her hands trembled not just from hunger but from fear. Fear of betrayal, fear of punishment, fear of hope. Yet even in her fear, she began to soften. She began to speak a few words in broken human language, simple words like thank or safe. One evening, as Daniel handed over a loaf of bread, the mother asked in a rough voice, "Why, you help?" Her accent was heavy, but her meaning was clear. Daniel paused. He looked at her, then at the little girl who was nibbling happily. He thought of his own past, the nights his mother went without food just to give him her share. "Because no one helped me once," he finally said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of memory. The mother looked at him, her eyes softening for the first time. She did not reply, but she did not look away either. The bond grew silently, slowly, weaving itself between them like invisible threads. The little girl began to laugh when Daniel teased her with small gestures. She would hide behind her mother and peek out with shy giggles. Daniel would bring her little surprises: an apple polished until it shone, a scarf he had found at the market, worn but warm. She hugged it close to her chest as if it was treasure, but not everyone was blind to this new bond. One afternoon, as Daniel left the alley, two men stopped him. They crossed their arms, blocking his path. "We've seen you," one of them spat. His face was twisted with disdain. "Feeding them, wasting food on those creatures." Daniel clenched his fists. He kept his voice calm. "They're starving, I can't just ignore it." The man sneered. "They're not our kind. They're nothing but trouble. You'll regret this, human." With a shove to his shoulder, they let him go, but the warning hung heavy in the air. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The words echoed in his head. But when he thought of the little girl's smile, of her small hand clutching his coat, he knew he would not stop. He had made his choice. The next day, the mother tried to warn him. She pointed to the guards patrolling the streets, Her voice shook as she said, "Danger. For you." Daniel only shook his head. "Let them talk," he replied. "I'll still come." Her eyes glistened. She turned away quickly, but he saw the silent tear slide down her cheek. It was not only hunger she carried, it was fear. Fear that his kindness would cost him dearly. As days passed, the city grew colder. Winter crept in with icy winds. The mother wrapped her daughter tightly in scraps of cloth. The girl shivered, her teeth chattering. Daniel could not bear the sight. He brought them firewood and an old blanket. The mother tried to refuse, but Daniel pressed it into her hands. On evening, the girl surprised him. She toddled up to him with a small flower in her hand, wilted but still colorful. She held it out shyly. Daniel knelt, taking it carefully as if it was the most precious gift in the world. "For me?" he asked gently. The girl nodded, her eyes wide with hope. Daniel's heart ached. He placed the flower in his pocket. "Thank you," he whispered. The mother watched. Silently, her lips pressed tight, but her eyes were softer than ever before. The bond was no longer just about food. It was about trust, about seeing each other as more than strangers. The alley that had once been filled with fear now held something, fragile but powerful, hope. Yet even as Daniel left that night, he felt the weight of many eyes on his back. Whispers followed him like shadows. Some were cruel, some mocking, and some full of silent curiosity. Daniel knew danger was growing, but he also knew one thing for certain. He could not stop now. Not when their lives depended on it. Not when he had already chosen to stand with them. And somewhere in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning of a path that would change all of their lives forever. The nights grew colder and the city streets turned harsher. The alien mother wrapped her daughter in scraps of cloth, holding her close to her chest as if shielding her from the world. Each day Daniel came with food. Each day the little girl's smile grew brighter. But each day the mother's fear also grew heavier. Her name was Lyra, though Daniel did not know it yet. She had survived many winters before, but never in a place so hostile. Humans watched her kind with suspicion. Soldiers patrolled the streets, searching for any who did not belong. Lyra had seen others dragged away in chains, beaten for less than what Daniel was doing. Every time she accepted his bread, her hands trembled. She wanted to trust him, but she had lived long enough to know kindness often had a price. Why would a human man bring food to her and her child every day, risking shame and punishment, unless he wanted something in return? One evening, as Daniel placed food in her hands, she looked him in the eyes for the first time. Her voice was sharp, filled with trembling anger and hidden sorrow. "Why? Why do this?" she asked in broken human words. "What you want?" Daniel blinked. He shook his head. "Nothing. I just want you both to eat." His words were simple, but Lyra did not believe them fully. No one gave without reason, not in this world. Her daughter, Mira, clutched the bread with joy. Her little laugh filled the alley. Daniel smiled at her, and for a moment, Lyra's heart softened. But then footsteps echoed down the street, and fear rushed back into her chest. She pushed her daughter behind her, her alien eyes darting like a hunted animal. Two guards walked past, their armor glinting under the faint streetlight. Daniel lowered his head and stood still, pretending he was only resting. The guards glanced into the alley, their eyes landing on Lyra and her child. Lyra held her breath, gripping Mira so tightly. The girl whimpered, but the guards kept walking, laughing about something else. Their voices faded, and Lyra finally exhaled. Her hands shook, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She turned to Daniel sharply. "No more. You stop." "Too dangerous," Daniel's brow furrowed. "If I stop, you'll starve." She shook her head violently. "Better starve, then you die." Her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel looked at her in silence. He saw the fear in her trembling body, the desperation of a mother who would rather go hungry than see someone else harmed because of her. He remembered his own mother again, remembered how she had carried burdens alone so he could live, and his heart ached. "I can't stop," Daniel whispered firmly. "Not when she smiles like that." He nodded at Mira, who was happily chewing bread. her small, hands messy but full of life. Lyra wanted to argue, but her throat closed. The truth was simple. Her daughter was alive only because of him. That was something she could not ignore. Days passed and her fear grew. Rumors spread quickly through the market. People said the human who worked at the factory had taken pity on aliens. Some mocked him. Some spat when they said his name. Some whispered he was a traitor. Others threatened to report him to the guards. Lyra heard the whispers too. She knew it was only a matter of time before someone acted. So one night when Daniel arrived with food, she tried to stop him again. "No, come," she pleaded, her alien words rough but clear. "They watch, they know you will be hurt." Daniel shook his head, his jaw set. "I don't care what they say. I care about you and her." Lyra's chest tightened. The words were dangerous, too kind, too human. She turned away quickly, hiding the wetness in her eyes. That night, as Mira slept curled in her arms, Lyra stared at the dark sky. She thought of her old home, a world far away, burned and broken by war. She thought of her husband, who had never returned from battle. And now here she was, stranded in a city where kindness was forbidden, where the only light came from a man who risked everything for them. She was torn between gratitude and terror. What if the guards found out? What if the men who had sneered at him decided to act? What if her daughter lost the only friend who had ever cared? The next day proved her fear was not unfounded. As Daniel handed over bread, a stone flew past and struck the wall. He turned sharply to see two boys laughing cruelly. "Feeding the pests again," one shouted. "Careful, human, or you'll catch their sickness." They laughed and ran off, leaving dust behind. Mira clung to Daniel's leg, frightened. Lyra's heart raced. She pulled her daughter close and hissed, "See, danger." Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling. In his chest he wanted to chase them, to shout, but instead he took a deep breath. He looked at Lyra and said quietly, "I won't stop." His stubbornness terrified her, yet deep inside it also warmed her. No one had ever stood so firmly. For them, not even their own kind. That night she dreamed of chains, of guards tearing Daniel away, of Mira crying out for him. She woke in a cold sweat, holding her daughter tight. Her fear was no longer just for herself. It was for him too, the strange human who kept defying the world for them. She did not know what fate awaited them, but she knew one truth. Her fear would not leave until she made a choice, either to push him away forever or to accept the dangerous bond forming between them. For now she chose silence. But silence could not hold forever, and the city's eyes were watching, waiting. The city slept uneasily that night. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the wind that howled between narrow alleys. Daniel finished his long shift at the factory and carried food as usual. His steps echoed against the stone streets. But something felt wrong. The streets seemed emptier than usual, the shadows deeper. When he reached the alley, he found Lyra and Mira curled together. The mother hummed softly, trying to calm her child. Daniel smiled gently as he handed her a small bundle, bread wrapped in cloth and a flask of warm broth. Mira's eyes lit up as always, but Lyra's expression was tense. Her alien senses were sharper than his, and she felt danger before it arrived. She looked around nervously, her voice low. "Not safe tonight, I feel eyes." Daniel frowned but nodded. He trusted her instincts. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Eat quickly, then I'll walk you somewhere safer." But before they could move, a harsh sound cut through the night. Laughter, cruel and mocking from the shadows. A group of men stepped forward. 5 of them, rough and angry, carrying sticks and knives, their faces twisted with hate. "There he is," one of them sneered, "the human who feeds pests." Another spat on the ground. "You think you're a hero, feeding animals." Daniel stepped in front of Lyra and Mira. His heart pounded, but his stance was firm. "Leave them alone," he said, his voice calm but steady. The men laughed, one swinging his stick lazily. "Or what? You'll fight us for them." "You've chosen the wrong side, human," Mira whimpered, and clutched her mother's leg. Lyra pulled her close, her own eyes burning with fear and anger. "Please," she whispered to Daniel. "Run. Save yourself." But Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. His legs rooted to the ground, his fists clenched tightly. The first man lunged forward, swinging his stick. Daniel blocked with his arm, pain shooting through him. He countered with a punch that sent the man staggering back. The others roared in anger and rushed forward. The alley exploded into chaos. Daniel fought with all his strength, throwing punches, dodging strikes. But he was outnumbered. A blow struck his side, another his back. He gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Behind him, Mira cried, "Stop, stop." Her little voice breaking the night. Lyra looked around desperately. She grabbed a broken bottle from the ground and held it up. Her hand shook, but her eyes blazed. "Stay back," she hissed. For the first time, her voice carried power. The men laughed, mocking her. "Look at the alien witch, trying to fight," one sneered. Daniel stumbled as a knife grazed his arm. Blood dripping down, he swung back, knocking one man into the wall. The fight was brutal, raw. The sound of fists, curses, and Mira's sobs filled the alley. Then, a shout rang out from the far end. "Enough!" A group of neighbors appeared. Drawn by the noise, some held lanterns, others farm tools. Their faces were mixed, fear, pity, and anger. "Leave him be," one older man said, stepping forward. His voice was firm. "He's done no harm. He's only feeding the hungry." The attackers hesitated, muttering curses, but the crowd grew larger. Their confidence began to fade. One spat at the ground and growled, "This isn't over." They backed away slowly, disappearing into the night, their footsteps fading, their threat lingering like poison in the air. Silence returned, broken only by Daniel's heavy breathing. His lip was split, his arm bleeding, but he was still standing. Lyra rushed forward, dropping the broken bottle. She grabbed his arm, her alien hands trembling as they touched his wounds. Why you do this?" Her voice cracked with pain and confusion. Daniel winced but smiled faintly. "Because no one else will." His voice was tired but steady. Mira crawled out from behind her mother and clutched his leg, her little eyes wet with tears. "Don't leave," she whispered. Her words broke his heart. The neighbors lingered, whispering among themselves. Some disapproved, shaking their heads, but others looked at Daniel with something different. Respect. One woman pressed a cloth into Lyra's hands. "Clean his wound," she said. Softly, her eyes flicked to Daniel. "You're braver than most of us." For the first time, Lyra felt something shift in the air. Not all humans hated them. Not all would turn away. Still, fear coiled tightly in her chest. She knew danger had only begun. The men would return, the guards might come, and Daniel would be the one to pay. That night, Daniel sat on the cold ground, his back against the alley wall. Lyra cleaned his wound silently, her hands gentle but unsteady. Mira leaned against him, her head resting on his lap. She had stopped crying, her breathing soft. Daniel looked down at her and whispered, "You're safe now." His words were a promise, one that burned deep inside him. Lyra's eyes met his for a brief moment. They held no suspicion this time, only fear mixed with gratitude. But as the night stretched on, one truth became clear. This could not go on. The alley was no longer safe. The shadows now held enemies, and whispers had turned into open threats. If they stayed, it would only be a matter of time before something worse happened. Lyra stared into the darkness, her arms around Mira. Her heart pounded with a single terrifying thought. What if Daniel was forced to choose, his safety or theirs? She closed, her eyes tightly, silently begging the stars that he would not be broken by the weight of protecting them. And Daniel, battered and bleeding, already knew his choice. He would never abandon them. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Daniel's body ached from the fight. His arm throbbed where the knife had grazed him, and his ribs felt sore. But what hurt him more was the memory of Mira's terrified cries. He had tried to close his eyes and rest, but each time he did, he saw the fear in her small face, the desperation in Lyra's trembling hands. The alley was no longer safe. He knew it, and Lyra knew it too. The shadows now carried more than hunger. They carried danger. His mind turned over the same question again and again. How long before? Those men returned with more friends. How long before soldiers, stirred by whispers, decided to act? When Daniel walked back to the alley with bread that morning, Lyra was waiting. Her eyes scanned the street nervously before he even stepped close. Mira clung to her side, her tiny fingers gripping the folds of her mother's torn cloak. Lyra's face was pale, her voice urgent. You stop now. No more. They watch. They hurt you? Daniel shook his head. I can't stop. His voice was firm but gentle. He knelt to Mira's level and handed her a small apple. Her eyes sparkled as she grabbed it, her little teeth biting into it with delight. Lyra pulled her close, her alien eyes sharp with worry. Why you do this? She asked again, her voice cracking. You fight, you bleed, you get nothing. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. He thought of his lonely home, empty walls and silent nights. He thought of the way Mira's laugh lit the dark alley, of the way Lyra's guarded eyes slowly softened when she saw him. Finally, he whispered, I get something. I get to see you alive. His words were simple, but they cut through the heavy silence. Lyra blinked, her lips parting in shock. She turned her face away quickly, hiding the emotion rising in her eyes. That night, as Daniel lay in his bed, he stared at the cracked ceiling. His decision formed quietly. He could not let them remain in that alley, not another night. He imagined the thugs returning, imagined Mira's cry, imagined Lyra dragged away in chains. His chest burned at the thought. He sat up suddenly, his hands clenched into fists. His choice was made. The next evening, Daniel returned, his arm still bandaged, his eyes tired but full of fire. Lyra looked at him warily, sensing something different. Mira ran to him as usual, her small laugh warming the cold air. Daniel crouched, hugging her gently, then stood and faced Lyra. You can't stay here anymore, he said. His voice was steady. It's not safe. Not after last night. Lyra stiffened, clutching Mira closer. We have no place, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. Yes, you do. With me. Come live with me. For a moment, silence froze the world. Lyra's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected many things, perhaps another fight, perhaps his final goodbye, but not this. Not an invitation, not the offer of a home. No, she said quickly, shaking her head. Too dangerous. If they see us with you, they punish you, maybe worse. Her voice trembled, her fear clawing at her chest. She had already lost too much. She could not bear the thought of destroying the only human who had shown them kindness. But Daniel stepped closer, his voice low and fierce. Lyra, they will come again, and next time I might not be there in time. Do you want Mira to live her life hiding in alleys, shivering in the cold, waiting for scraps? She deserves better. You both do. Mira looked between them, her little hands tugging at her mother's arm. Mama, please, she whispered. Her broken human words made Lyra's heart twist. The girl's eyes shone with hope too fragile to crush. Lyra's lips trembled. She wanted to refuse, wanted to protect Daniel by staying far away. But then she looked down at her daughter, saw her thin frame, saw the light in her eyes when she looked at Daniel, and she knew, deep down, that the alley could no longer be their prison. Tears filled her eyes. She bowed her head, whispering, If you sure. Her voice cracked like glass. Daniel reached out gently, resting his hand on her shoulder. I'm sure, he said. His voice carried no hesitation, only truth. That night, as the streets grew dark, Daniel led them through the city. Mira held his hand tightly, her little feet stumbling but determined. Lyra walked close behind, her head low, her heart pounding. She expected guards to leap from every corner, expected the mob to cry out, but the streets remained quiet. When they reached his home, Daniel pushed open the wooden door. The house was small with plain walls and little furniture, but it was warm. Mira gasped, her eyes wide. To her, it looked like a palace. She ran to the corner where a small bed stood, pressing her hands against the blanket as if it were treasure. Daniel smiled faintly. His heart swelled at her joy. Lyra stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning every detail. She had not been inside a human's home in years. She touched the wall, the table, the chair, as if testing whether they were real. Daniel turned to her, his voice gentle. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you under my roof." Lyra's chest tightened. A tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. She quickly wiped it away, whispering, "Thank you." For the first time in many years, Lyra and Mira slept in warmth. Not on cold stone, but under blankets. Mira curled up peacefully, her little breath soft. Lyra lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling. She was still afraid, but for the first time her fear was mixed with something else. Hope. Daniel sat by the doorway, his body aching but his heart calm. He knew what he had done. He had crossed a line. But as he listened to Mira's soft breathing and saw Lyra's guarded but grateful eyes, he also knew he had made the only choice he could live. They were no longer just strangers in an alley. They were family now. Daniel's house was no longer silent. For years he had lived alone, returning from long shifts at the factory to empty rooms and cold meals. But now laughter, soft footsteps, and whispers filled the air. Mira's tiny voice echoed through the halls as she explored every corner. Lyra's careful hands moved over the table, the chairs, even the old pots, as if testing whether she was dreaming. At first it felt strange. Daniel sat at the table one evening watching Lyra break bread in two, small pieces for Mira. He realized he hadn't shared a meal with anyone in years. The little girl giggled when Daniel pretended to fumble with his spoon, and for a moment the heaviness in his chest lifted. He smiled, quietly grateful. But outside, the world was not so kind. Neighbors began to notice the new shadows behind Daniel's curtains. They noticed the small figure of a child peeking out the window, the shape of a woman moving about inside. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see who lives in his house now?" one market woman asked, her tone sharp. "Aliens, both of them. He brought them in." Another man spat on the ground. "Foolish. Human. Doesn't he know they'll bring trouble? The guards won't ignore this." Some shook their heads in pity. Others sneered. A few simply remained silent, but the whispers grew day by day. Daniel felt the eyes on him as he walked to work. Men muttered under their breath. Women pulled their children closer. A few brave souls asked him outright, "Why are they in your home? What are you doing, Daniel?" He ignored the questions, but inside he knew the city was watching. At home, Lyra tried to keep to herself. She cleaned the little house quietly, washed dishes, and mended torn clothes. She moved softly, like a ghost, always afraid of drawing too much attention. Sometimes she whispered, "We go, we leave." But Daniel shook his head each time. "You're safe here," he said firmly. Mira, however, was different. The girl was too young to carry the heavy fear her mother held. She laughed when Daniel tossed her into the air. She clapped her hands when he brought her small treats from the market. Sometimes she would sit on the floor with an old book, pointing at the pictures, repeating human words in her broken accent. Daniel's chest warmed. Each time she called him friend. One evening, as Daniel returned home, he found Lyra staring out the window. Her face was pale. Her hands clenched. She whispered, "They know. They whisper. I hear them outside." Her voice shook. Daniel stepped closer. "Let them talk," he said. "They won't touch you here." But Lyra shook her head. "You don't understand. Whisper is storm. Storm will come." Her alien eyes glistened with worry. She had lived long enough to know whispers always grew into danger. That night, Daniel dreamed of soldiers breaking down his door. He woke with sweat on his brow. The dream clung to him as he went to work. In the factory, he overheard two men talking. "The fool's hiding aliens in his house. It won't last. The guards will deal with him soon." They laughed cruelly. Daniel's fists clenched, but he kept silent. He had no choice. Back at home, Lyra tried to make life easier for him. She cooked with what little they had. She kept the house neat. Sometimes she would whisper, "Why you do all this? Why risk?" Daniel never had a grand answer. He only said, "Because I can't let you suffer. Because Mira deserves to laugh." Each time he said it, her eyes softened, though fear still lingered in them. Mira, innocent and bright, began to call Daniel's house home. She clung to his arm when he left for work and cheered when he returned. Her laughter filled the once empty rooms. And though danger loomed outside, inside those walls, they felt like a family. But not everyone in the city was blind to kindness. An older woman from next door came one evening with a small bundle. She knocked on Daniel's door, and when Lyra opened it nervously, she pushed the bundle into her hands. "Clothes," she whispered. "For the child. Don't tell anyone I gave them." Her eyes darted nervously and she hurried away. Lyra stood frozen, shocked by the small act of mercy. Daniel smiled faintly. "See? Not everyone hates you." But Lyra shook her head. "Small light cannot stop big fire." Her words chilled him, and the fire was indeed growing. One night, as Daniel returned late, he found words scrawled on his door in harsh paint. "Traitor." His chest tightened. He looked around but saw only shadows. He wiped the paint away quickly, not wanting Lyra or Mira to see. But inside, the warning echoed. The city would not stay silent much longer. That evening, as Mira fell asleep curled in a blanket, Lyra sat by the fire, her face heavy with worry. She whispered, "They will come, Daniel. You must let us go before storm breaks." Daniel looked at her, his voice steady. "I won't let you go. I chose this. I chose you both." Her lips trembled. She turned away, tears slipping down her cheeks. It was the first time someone had ever said those words to her. The first time she felt chosen, not abandoned. But even as warmth filled her heart, fear gripped it tighter. Outside, the whispers grew into anger. Inside, a fragile bond grew into love and family. And Lyra knew the storm was closer than ever. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Daniel knew something was wrong the moment he stepped outside his door. The air felt heavy, the street unusually empty. He glanced around, his chest tightening. Somewhere, deep inside, he knew the whispers had finally grown into action. Inside the house, Lyra was helping Mira eat breakfast. The little girl giggled as she tried to balance a piece of bread on her nose. Daniel forced a smile, but his eyes kept flicking. To the window, his instincts screamed at him, warning of what was coming. The sound arrived soon after. Boots heavy and sharp against the stone road. The rhythm of soldiers marching. Daniel's jaw tightened. He turned toward the door just as fists pounded against it. A voice barked, "Open up, by order of the city. Guard." Mira froze, her eyes wide with fear. Lyra pulled her close, her alien eyes shining with terror. "They come," she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel's heart pounded. He stood tall, his hands clenched. He knew he could not run, not now. The pounding grew louder. "Open this door or we break it down." Daniel opened it himself. He refused to let them shatter his home. 5 soldiers stood outside, armored and armed. Their captain stepped forward, his eyes cold. "We've heard the rumors, human," he said, his voice sharp. "Aliens in your home against the law, hand them over now." Daniel's chest burned, his voice came out steady. "No," the captain's eyes narrowed. "Do you understand what you're saying? If you resist, you will be punished. If you surrender them, you will walk free." Daniel glanced back. He saw Mira clinging to her mother, her little hands shaking. He saw Lyra's face, pale but strong. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to beg him not to fight. But her eyes held something else. Hope, fragile but real. He stepped outside, blocking the doorway with his body. His voice rose, clear and strong. "They are under my roof, they are my family, and I will not hand them over." A murmur spread through the street. The neighbors had gathered, drawn by the sound of soldiers. Some gasped, some whispered. He said, "Family," the captain sneered. "Family. They are not your kind, they are vermin." His hand went to the hilt of his sword. "Step aside." But Daniel did not move. His voice shook with anger. "You call them vermin. But I see a mother and a child. I see hunger, pain, and hope. You want to take them because it's easy, because they're weak. But I won't let you." Behind him, Lyra's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered to herself in her own tongue, words Daniel could not understand. But Mira's voice rang out, small but clear. "No take, Mama, no take." The crowd stirred, their eyes shifted. Some who had whispered against Daniel now felt a spark of shame. One woman called out, "He fed them when no one else would." Another man muttered, "He's braver than the guards." The soldiers hesitated. Their captain scowled, sensing the shift. He raised his sword, but before he could speak, more voices rose. "Leave them be," shouted a neighbor. "He's done nothing wrong." The crowd pressed closer, not with weapons, but with presence, with courage. Daniel's stand had lit something in them. "Thorike," Captain growled, his eyes flicking between the growing crowd and Daniel's unyielding stance. For a moment, tension burned like fire, blades against bare hands. But then he lowered his sword with a hiss. "This isn't over," he spat, turning sharply. "We'll return." The soldiers marched away, their boots fading into the distance. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering about what they had witnessed. But something had changed. Whispers of hate had been met. With whispers of courage, Daniel turned back inside, his body trembling from the weight of what had just happened. Lyra stood frozen. Mira clutched in her arms, her eyes shimmered with tears. She stepped forward slowly. "Why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why risk everything?" Daniel looked at her, his voice soft but steady. "Because no one should stand alone. Because you and Mira, you are my family now." The words broke something inside her. Lyra's tears finally fell. She dropped to her knees, clutching Mira close. Mira smiled, reaching out her small hands toward Daniel. "Family," she said in her broken voice. Daniel knelt too, resting a hand on Lyra's trembling shoulder. His chest ached, but his heart felt lighter than ever before. For years he had walked through life alone, but now he knew his path. Outside, danger still lingered. The soldiers would return. The city would not forget. But inside those walls, a bond stronger than fear had been forged. That night, as the three of them sat together by the fire, Mira curled up between them, Lyra's hand resting